I'm Master Saturn, and we're back. We took Pride Month off from podcasting. We just kind of relaxed and chilled. Although I have been working a ton behind the scenes and just in my life, and we both have full time jobs and just all kinds of things going on in our personal lives. But we wanted to bring back our BDSM Summer School series. It's been a couple summers since we did this. In our previous version, we went through the BDSM acronym and we put a lot of emphasis on the B and the D, bondage and discipline, because those are two aspects of the acronym that people really don't understand. They don't understand that those letters aren't in the acronym because of their kinks. It doesn't have really to do with bondage as a kink and discipline as a kink. They are umbrella terms that have to do with far more and really are related to power exchange relationships. We kind of unpacked all of that in a couple summers ago in our BDSM Summer School series. And in this BDSM Summer School series, we are taking on master slave relationships. We're just using that terminology, master slave, even though it could be people of any gender or any combination of genders or non binary people. It really could be anyone based on gender or indifferent of gender or sexuality or any of that. Any two consenting adult people could be involved in an MS relationship or a master slave. They could have different titles, things like owner and handler, owner and pet. There's all these different identities as an underneath the umbrella of master slave. But we're just going to use the term master slave just to keep it simple, not because we prefer any gender like a male master or female slave. Not we prefer any of that over anything else. A lot of times we are using resources that are pre 1990s, and they involve homosexual relationships where it was a male master and a male slave. And so a lot of the resources we're using use that terminology of master and slave because when they were written, their audience was male masters and male slaves. It's kind of a messy topic, master slave. Contemporary consensual master slave relationships, they occupy a really awkward position in the general BDSM culture of today. People a lot of times recognize DS relationships these days more prominently as dominant and submissive. People understand aspects of role play when it comes to individual scenes, but people are sometimes at a loss of what is MS. And we're going to over the month perhaps settle some of the disputes over different definitions. We may tell you a little bit of how to develop, how to maintain consensual master slave relationships. And we're going to draw from the expertise of many different individuals. And we're going to talk about some aspects of MS relationships that you probably have never heard or read about. It's not that there's something new, they're just a lot of people don't really do a deep dive into MS relationships. Really, our first attempt, though, is to place contemporary master slave relationships into their historical context. We may look at some forms of slavery in ancient pre-modern times, and we'll point out how they differ from consensual modern master slave relationships today. Most societies in history really have practiced forms of non consensual slavery at some time. And really, uh, there are some similarities, but really a vast variety of differences. Uh, we really don't want to make any kind of apology or any kind of justification for coercive slavery, whether it's legal in your part of the world or otherwise. We're really going to narrow our talk to BDSM and to the consensual master slave relationships. Uh, to trace the history of consensual master and or mastery and slavery, there is a connection that has to be acknowledged with some of the history, but it really raises the question of defining slavery and distinguishing it from serfdom, apprenticeship, and other forms of servitude. Here in modern North America, slave usually brings to mind, above all, the peculiar institution of chattel slavery in the United States before our Civil War that we had in our country, generally regarded as a great evil and a stain on American history, and quite rightly so. But that wasn't the only form of slavery in history. While antebellum slavery was primarily a source of cheap, unskilled labor, throughout history, slaves have performed every kind of work, including that of the most learned professions, and some have held the highest governmental and military positions in various countries and in various parts of the world in various historical times. What made slaves so useful was that they could be used however the owner wanted. Therefore, we can't define slavery in terms of slave labor, meaning work of the lowest or the least pleasant kind. And even a person even a person treated as properly or property isn't really enough, as ideas of property have also changed vastly over history. So, how can we define slavery historically? And how does that relate to MS relationships, master and slave relationships today within the context of BDSM? Well, first, involuntary slavery requires violence, meaning a literal or a symbolic application of force, both to make a person a slave and to keep that person a slave. Involuntary slavery generally is very coercive, and it's based on violence, social death, and dishonor. According to Orlando Patterson's Slavery and Social Death, which was uh, published in 1982. It's a far reaching survey of slavery in many different human societies. He argues that slavery is not simply a matter of treating a person as property, but in a particular type of relationship in which one person has the power to treat another as property. He proposes that three-part definition of coercive master slave relations based on violence and social death and dishonor. The Using my biblical uh, uh, theology degree, one of the notes of one of the noteworthy things about the kind of slavery that was not um, tolerable among Christians and Jews was that of someone who was kidnapped, someone who was involuntarily made a slave. Um, we don't really we're not asking you to follow Christianity or Judaism or anything biblical. I just wanted to point that out in regards to involuntary slavery and how it is violent. Violence may just mean kidnap, coerced, taken by some kind of force. Whether the slave is an outsider who has been partly assimilated into the slave-holding society through capture, or a former member who has been partly expelled from the society as punishment, enslavement is a drastic change of personal status. Some people will relate that the modern criminal justice system in a lot of different countries is a form of slavery, slavery as punishment. A slave society is necessarily a martial society because it must continue performing the same kind of violence, both to acquire new slaves and to prevent or put down slave revolts. Again, kind of leaning back on the idea or the philosophy that prisons these days are forms of involuntary slavery, is that on the outside of them there are fences, there are guard towers with people holding guns that will commit violence if someone tries to jump the fence, to escape, to run. And likewise, the historical perspective of involuntary slavery is similar to that. We're not making a lot of political leaps or we're not trying to condemn people politically for or make political statements. We're just kind of talking in general terms here. And we're just trying to show the differences between involuntary slavery and consensual BDSM slavery. Within consensual BDSM slavery, it is nonviolent, it is consensual. Punishment becomes a ritual that reminds everybody, punisher, punished, and witness, where they stand in the social order, literally which end of the whip they are on. And while BDSM relationships may include punishments and a whip may be used, the punishment isn't meant to keep somebody keep somebody inside the slave relationship. It is meant just to institute behavioral change when used. Someone is always free to remove the collar, to end the relationship, to leave the relationship. Nobody is kept a slave within BDSM by any kind of violence or force, or nobody is risking retaliation or punishment. It's actually even a lot of times the responsibility of the master in a BDSM relationship to help his slave get on their feet if they choose to end the relationship, to get back on their feet as an independent person with personal autonomy, to help them out as they look for a job if they didn't have one, and to help them reintegrate back into society as a person with personal autonomy again. So that is somewhat a hallmark. Nobody is kept by violence. Nobody is kept by force. Second, involuntary slaves are alienated. The definition of a slave, however recruited, is as a socially dead person, alienated from all rights or claims of birth. He ceased to belong in his own right to any legitimate social order. All slaves experienced, at the very least, a secular excommunication. A slave changed status in the world. But within BDSM, slaves may change status within that relationship, But in regards to family and persons outside of that relationship, they maintain all of the same dignity, respect, and humanity that exists in every other person in the world. Third, a slave, going back, a slave could claim ties to a parent, child, spouse, or sibling, and those might be respected by other slaves, but they had no force in a slaveholding society. A slave's only recognized link to the rest of society was his or her master. So there was a lot of alienation. And that's something that we often try to have people avoid. Avoid a living in a bubble that is a total BDSM bubble that shouldn't be encouraged in most cases. Third, involuntary slaves are without honor, intrinsically unclean and or profane. According to the book that we're referencing, the slave could have no honor because he had no power and no independent social existence, hence no public worth. He had no name of his own to defend. He could only defend his master's worth in his master's name. That the dishonor was a general condition must be emphasized, since the free and honorable person, ever alive to slights and insults, occasionally experiences specific acts of dishonor to which, of course, he or she responds by taking appropriate action. The slave usually stood outside the game of honor. Um, like we say, that you have all of the same rights legally as a citizen of the country that you are a citizen to, even if you are in a BDSM relationship. You still, uh, you still have all the rights of citizenship in the outside vanilla world that we live in, even when you are within a BDSM relationship. So that's what separates it from consensual BDSM slavery from involuntary slavery. Perhaps surprisingly, the basic elements of Patterson's three-part definition of involuntary or coercive slavery also appear in consensual slavery as is practiced in the MS culture today in different ways. So we do want to note that there are different expressions. Violence is exciting and sexy, even when even when it's performed in a game or a ritual or a performance. The power relation of consensual slavery occurs on a very physical, personal level, and many, if not all, consensual masters and slaves are fascinated by the physical means that they traditionally use to enforce that power within the BDSM relationship, such as whipping, nakedness, cages, shackles. They are they are parts of scenes and parts of play, but they aren't but violence isn't used to keep somebody a slave. Alienation, consensual master slave relationships are replete with rituals, protocols, contracts, maybe house rules, symbolic objects like collars. And these take the slave and the master out of their everyday life and into an intimate bond that is between them in their own society of two. So while there isn't an alienation from or a bubble that they exist in, all by themselves, we still live in the world that we live in. There is an intimate bond, a special intimate bond created between master and slave. So in that way, there is some aspects that are alien to those outside of a relationship. Dishonor for both men and women, their honor, or more generally, their social worth, is based very much on their sexual behavior, though in very different ways. A person without honor is outside the restrictions of sexual propriety. Other fantasies of slavery, BDSM slavery, typically occur in a space where sexual transgression, whether polygamy, homosexuality, or just sexual excess, become permissible. Like a nun, a monk, a soldier, a consensual slave steps outside of everyday life and enters a new social state with different rules, different expectations. So just because, or sorry, whether consensual or coercive, a liminal figure, partly us and partly them, both person and property within the household, but not related by blood or marriage. In this social space, pleasures and intimacies are possible that cannot be had in any other way. So there, how do I put this in? So while you, like I said, while you are still a citizen in the world, there um, there can be aspects of play such as humiliation, degrading, and things like that. Those things can be part of your consensual master slave relationship if it is negotiated, if it is part of that relationship that you're entering into, but it doesn't have to be part. Some masters don't want that for their slaves. Some slaves don't want to enter into relationships or consensual relationships with masters who are into those things. And so consensual master slave relationships can be seen as a kind of customized kinship, filling particular emotional and social needs and coexisting with established forms of kinship, such as marriage and the nuclear family. So hopefully that gives you just kind of a rough idea as we look at um, Orlando Patterson's Slavery and Social Death from 1982, and just kind of look at ways where some ways, and we'll discuss more as we go along, but some ways that involuntary slavery is different than consensual BDSM slavery. It's always an interesting topic, and it's somewhat a messy topic, and we recognize that. You can find our previous BDSM United our previous BDSM Summer School series. You can find those archives and things. You can access that through bdsmunited.com, which is our website, has all of our resources listed on it. You can find our personal pages. You can find Whips, Chains, and Duct Tape, which is our major blog page. You can find our podcast, our YouTube. We encourage you to watch our videos on YouTube. It's a good way to view them. You can also find us on Spotify, Apple Music, everywhere that podcasts are heard is where you can find this podcast. And so thank you for joining me today. And, this is a messy topic, a lot to kind of process. I'm kind of processing it as I'm podcasting it. So if I seem a little scatterbrained or whatnot, I'm jumping back into podcasting after a month off with the messiest topic that I could come up with. This is a total challenge for me. And, I just hope that you enjoy, this look at master slave relationships from somebody who is transitioning into his own master slave relationship. And we're going to talk some about our unique structure and where we draw that from, and, just a lot more as this BDSM Summer School series unfolds. I'm Master Saturn. Thank you for joining me today, and I will talk with you again soon.